Northwood High, a place of learning they called it. But the students knew better. They whispered tales, stories of cold drafts in warm rooms, unexplained noises echoing in the dead of night. Northwood High had a secret, a dark and terrifying past. I started attending Northwood High in the fall. From the moment I stepped inside, something felt off. The air was heavy, thick with an unseen presence. The silence in the hallways was unnerving, broken only by the sound of my own footsteps. Even the laughter of other students seemed to die quickly, swallowed by the oppressive atmosphere. My first few weeks were plagued by strange occurrences. Books would fly off shelves in the library, landing at my feet with a loud thud. Lights would flicker and die as I walked past, plunging me into darkness. I brushed it off as my imagination, trying to convince myself it was just an old building. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The old janitor, a man with eyes that held a lifetime of secrets, noticed my unease. "You feel it, don't you?" he rasped one day, his voice barely a whisper. "This place, it has a way of getting under your skin." I wanted to dismiss him, to tell him it was all in his head, but something in his gaze stopped me. He knew. He had seen it too. Days turned into weeks, and the strange occurrences continued. The temperature in my classroom would plummet without reason, leaving me shivering in my seat, while others felt nothing. One particularly cold afternoon, I swore I saw a figure standing at the back of the class, a tall, shadowy figure with piercing eyes that seemed to burn into my soul. I blinked, and it was gone. But the feeling of dread lingered, clinging to me like a shroud. I confided in my friends, sharing the unsettling experiences that plagued my every move. At first they laughed it off, dismissing it as my overactive imagination. But as time went on and the strange events continued, even they couldn't deny the feeling that something was amiss. One evening, as I stayed late to study for an upcoming exam, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps echoing down the empty hallway outside the library door. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath catching in my throat. Who could be in the school at this hour? I cautiously approached the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. The hallway was empty. There was no one in sight. But the footsteps continued, growing louder now, coming from the floor above. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, hunted by an unseen presence. I gathered my things and fled the library, my heart racing as I sprinted through the deserted hallways, desperate to escape the suffocating presence that seemed to close in around me. I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. The footsteps, the cold, the feeling of being watched, it was all becoming too much to bear. I decided to confide in someone who might believe me, someone who might be able to help. I turned to the only person I thought might understand, the old janitor. The old man listened intently as I recounted my experiences, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. When I was finished, he sighed heavily, running a gnarled hand over his weathered face. "It's her," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "She's still here, trapped between this world and the next." He went on to tell me the story of a young girl named Sarah, a student who had attended Northwood High many years ago. Sarah was a bright and cheerful girl, full of life and laughter. But her life was tragically cut short one fateful night when she was brutally murdered within the very walls of the school. Her killer was never found, and her spirit was said to haunt the halls of Northwood High, seeking justice for her untimely demise. The janitor explained that Sarah's spirit was restless, unable to find peace. She wandered the halls, her presence felt by those who were sensitive to the supernatural. Section 5, the face in the window. "But why me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why do I see and feel these things?" The old man looked at me, his eyes filled with a wisdom that seemed to transcend time. "She senses something in you," he said. "A connection, perhaps. Or maybe she's trying to warn you." His words sent a chill down my spine. A warning? What could it possibly mean? Terror gripped me. I was living in a nightmare, haunted by the ghost of a murdered girl. Sleep offered no escape. I was plagued by nightmares, vivid and terrifying. Each night I saw her face, pale and mournful, staring at me through the darkness. One night I woke with a start, my heart pounding in my chest. A sound, faint but distinct, had stirred me from my sleep. It was coming from the window, a soft scratching noise, like fingernails dragging down glass. I slowly turned my head, my blood running cold. There, pressed against the window, was Sarah's face. Her eyes, wide and filled with a terrible longing, stared deep into mine. Section 6. The Library of Shadows. The next morning, I went back to the library. The janitor's tale had sparked a morbid curiosity in me. I needed answers. As I navigated the dusty shelves, I stumbled upon an old newspaper clipping tucked away in a forgotten book. The headline read, "Tragedy at Northwood High Student Found Dead." The article detailed the gruesome discovery of Sarah's body in the school library. It mentioned that she was last seen alive with a group of students, but no one had been charged with her murder. The article sent a shiver down my spine. I was standing in the very spot where she had been found. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Sarah's face, her pleading eyes. I knew I had to do something. I had to find out what really happened to her, to bring her peace. I returned to the library after midnight, armed with a flashlight and a growing sense of dread. Section 7. The Truth Unveiled. The library was silent, shrouded in darkness. The air was thick with dust and the faint scent of decay. I wandered through the towering bookshelves, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. As I reached the back of the library, I noticed something strange. A single bookshelf was slightly ajar, as if it had been pulled out and hastily pushed back into place. Curiosity got the better of me, and I cautiously moved towards it. As I peered behind the shelf, I gasped in horror. There, hidden from view, was a small, dusty room, and in the center of the room, lying on the cold concrete floor, was a single, solitary object. It was a yearbook. The cover was ripped and faded, but I could just make out the words Northwood High and the year Sarah had died. Trembling, I picked it up and opened it. As I flipped through the pages, I noticed something peculiar. One of the pages, the one dedicated to Sarah's class, had been defaced. Someone had scribbled over Sarah's picture with a red marker, writing hateful messages and accusations. Section 8. A Desperate Escape. And then it hit me. This wasn't just a random act of vandalism, this was a cover-up. Someone had gone to great lengths to erase Sarah's memory, to silence her forever. But why? What had she uncovered that had led to her demise? As I stood there, lost in thought, I heard a noise. A soft shuffling sound coming from the entrance to the hidden room. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Someone was in here with me. I quickly hid behind the bookshelf, my breath catching in my throat. The shuffling grew louder, closer. I peeked through a crack in the shelves. A figure emerged from the shadows, their face obscured by the darkness. They were holding a flashlight, the beam dancing across the dusty floor. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't see me. The figure moved towards the hidden room, their footsteps slow and deliberate. They paused at the entrance, their flashlight beam sweeping across the interior. I could hear my own heart beating in my ears. I had to get out of there. Section 9. Trapped. I waited for what felt like an eternity, my body trembling with fear. Finally, the figure moved on, disappearing into the labyrinthine aisles of the library. I took my chance and made a run for it, my flashlight bouncing wildly in my hand. I sprinted through the darkened library, my mind racing. Who was that? And what were they doing here at this hour? As I neared the library doors, I realized with a sickening feeling that they were locked. I rattled the handles, but they wouldn't budge. I was trapped. Panic surged through me. I was alone in the dark with no way out. And then I heard it again. The soft, shuffling footsteps. They were back, and they were getting closer. I glanced around frantically for a place to hide, but there was nowhere. The footsteps were right outside the door now. I could hear the faint jingle of keys. They were coming inside. Section 10. An Unsettling Discovery. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. I tripped over a stack of books and fell to the ground with a thud. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. The flashlight beam fell upon my face, blinding me momentarily. As my eyes adjusted, I gasped in horror. It was the old janitor. His eyes, usually filled with warmth and wisdom, were cold and calculating. In his hand, he held a small silver object. It was a lighter, the same lighter that had been found near Sarah's body all those years ago. "You weren't supposed to see that," he hissed, his voice barely a whisper. "Now you have to be silenced, just like her." He flicked the lighter, a small flame igniting in the darkness. The last thing I remember was the look of pure hatred in his eyes.